Marcus Donovan had never considered himself a social person. That's why he'd volunteered for Frontier Station Epsilon, humanity's furthest outpost, 3 months from Earth by the fastest ships perched on the edge of explored space. The small geodesic habitation domes housed just over 200 people, each seeking something different: adventure, science, escape. For Marcus, it was the silence. The vast star-filled darkness that stretched beyond his viewport each night promised solitude and peace after 15 years of military service that had left him with a permanently damaged leg and recurring nightmares. So it was ironic that his nearest neighbor turned out to be the only non-human resident of the station. Marcus limped along the curved pathway connecting the residential domes, passing hydroponic gardens where earth plants grew alongside alien specimens. He nodded politely to Dr. Jensen, who was examining some luminous purple flowers, and continued toward his destination, Dome 17. The door hissed open at his approach. Standing in the doorway, he hesitated before knocking on the inner compartment door. Everyone knew Valthorians valued privacy above almost everything, but something about the approaching holiday made the weight of isolation feel heavier than usual. 3 sharp raps, then silence. The door slid open, revealing a tall, slender figure with skin the color of pale blue ice. Geometric patterns of silver markings traced their way across her face and down her neck, disappearing beneath the high collar of her environmental suit. Her eyes, large, entirely silver with no visible pupil, regarded him without blinking. "Ilara," Marcus said with a nod, "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "You are." Her voice was melodic but flat, lacking the emotional inflections humans took for granted. "However, as I was merely cataloging stellar data, the interruption is not unwelcome. What brings you to my dwelling, Marcus Donovan?" He still wasn't used to how the Valthorians remembered every detail from even casual introductions. They'd spoken perhaps 5 times in the 6 months since she'd arrived. "Tomorrow is a human holiday, Thanksgiving." He shifted his weight off his bad leg. "Traditionally, it's a time when people gather together, share food, and, well, give thanks for what they have." One elegant eyebrow raised slightly, the most emotion he'd ever seen her display. "I am familiar with the historical context. Native peoples providing assistance to colonizers who would later appropriate their lands. An interesting choice of celebration for a space colony." Marcus winced. "The modern version is more about gratitude and community. I was planning to cook dinner and, well, I thought you might like to join me." For a long moment, Ilara said nothing. The silence stretched uncomfortably. "Most humans avoid me," she finally stated. "Commander Rivera suggested they find my presence unsettling. Why would you desire my company?" Marcus hadn't expected such directness, though he should have. Valthorians were known for their icy logic and blunt assessments. "No one should be alone on Thanksgiving," he said simply, "and I'd be interested to know more about you and your world." What he didn't say, that he'd noticed how she watched human interactions from a distance, how she lingered at the edges of gatherings in the communal spaces, observing with those silver eyes that missed nothing. "This is a social obligation then?" she asked. "No," Marcus replied, "just an invitation from one neighbor to another." Ilara tilted her head, the silvery patterns on her skin catching the light. "Very well, I accept. What customary offering should I bring to this ritual meal?" Marcus smiled, relieved. "Just yourself, dinner's at 1800 station time." What Marcus couldn't know as he limped back to his own dome was that Ilara Voxthal wasn't merely a scientific observer as the station believed. She was an evaluator, tasked by the Valthorian High Command with determining if humans were worthy of alliance in the coming galactic conflict. For 8 months, she had watched them from afar, compiled reports on their behaviors, their strengths, their obvious flaws. But she had not yet experienced their culture from within. As the door closed behind the departing human, Ilara touched the communication implant beneath her ear. "Evaluation proceeding to Phase 2, direct cultural immersion," she reported, beginning with ritualistic community gathering designated Thanksgiving. The response came instantly. "Proceed with caution, evaluator. Remember your training. Emotional contamination compromises objectivity." "Understood," she replied, while wondering what exactly humans meant by giving thanks, and why the concept seemed to matter so deeply to the otherwise practical Marcus Donovan. Tomorrow, perhaps, she would learn more about these contradictory beings who might hold the key to survival for both their species. Ilara arrived precisely at 1800 hours. Marcus knew this because he had been nervously checking the time every few minutes while juggling his cooking tasks. Despite his invitation's casual nature, he had spent the day recreating his grandmother's recipes as best he could with the station's limited supplies. The protein synthesizer had produced a reasonable turkey substitute, and he had traded his dessert rations for the week to acquire real potatoes from Dr. Jensen's experimental crop. When his door chimed, he wiped his hands nervously on a towel before opening it. Alara stood there, still in her environmental suit, but with the addition of a shimmering silver scarf draped over her shoulders. "I researched your holiday," she said without preamble. "The customary attire appears to be more formal than standard utility wear." Marcus smiled. "You look nice, please come in." She stepped inside, her silver eyes scanning his small dome home. The standard-issue furniture had been rearranged to accommodate a small table, now covered with a makeshift tablecloth and set with his best dishware, which meant the plates that weren't chipped from his journey to Epsilon. "You've altered your living space," she observed. "Just for the occasion, I wanted it to feel special." Marcus gestured to the table. "Would you like to sit? The food is almost ready." Alara took a seat, her posture perfect as she continued to study her surroundings. She noticed the small personal touches that made the otherwise utilitarian space feel like a home: a worn paperback book collection, a painted rock serving as a doorstop, a small plant growing in a recycled container. "Your environment contains many non-functional items," she noted. Marcus brought over a steaming dish of stuffing. "Not everything needs to be functional to have value," he replied. "Some things just make us happy." "Happiness is not a metric my people consider when organizing living spaces." "What do the Valthorians consider important then?" Marcus asked as he served their plates. Alara seemed to consider her answer carefully. "Efficiency, knowledge acquisition, community benefit. No room for personal preferences. Individual desires are secondary to collective advancement," she stated, though something in her tone suggested this was a recitation rather than a personal belief. As Marcus finished bringing the dishes to the table, turkey substitute, stuffing, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce synthesized to a remarkably authentic taste, and a small dish of roasted vegetables, he noticed Alara studying the food with scientific interest. "Before we eat," Marcus said, "there's a tradition. We share what we're thankful for." He sat down across from her. "I'll start. I'm thankful for this station, for a peaceful place after years of conflict, and I'm thankful for new connections even so far from home." He waited expectantly. Alara tilted her head, silver markings catching the light. "I find the concept perplexing. Gratitude is an emotional response with no practical function." "Sometimes the impractical things are what make life worth living," Marcus said gently, "but you don't have to participate if it makes you uncomfortable." "I am not uncomfortable," Alara corrected. "I am curious." She paused, seeming to search for words. "I am appreciative of this opportunity to understand human customs more thoroughly." It wasn't exactly what the tradition called for, but Marcus counted it as a win. "Then let's eat before it gets cold." The meal progressed with Marcus explaining each dish and its significance. Alara approached each food with methodical interest, taking small, careful bites and occasionally making notes on a small device she kept beside her plate. "The flavor combinations are complex," she observed after trying the stuffing. "The mixture of savory, sweet, and herbaceous compounds creates an interesting sensory experience." Marcus smiled. "That's one way of describing it. Do you like it?" Alara paused, fork midway to her mouth. "Like is subjective, but yes, I find it agreeable." As they ate, Marcus shared stories of past Thanksgivings: his mother's infamous burned rolls, his sister's habit of hiding peas under her napkin, the year the family dog stole the turkey when no one was looking. To his surprise, Alara asked questions, many questions, about family structures, about celebration purposes, about why humans would commemorate historical events with such selective memory of their troubling aspects. "We're complicated," Marcus admitted. "We remember what we want to remember sometimes. But the best of us try to learn from the past while creating new traditions that bring us together." When he served the pumpkin pie, a true luxury item that had cost him his coffee ration for a month, Alara took a bite and then froze. Her silver eyes widened slightly. "This produces an unusual sensation," she said quietly. "Bad unusuals." "No," she took another bite more deliberately this time. "It is warming." After dinner, Marcus suggested they watch the station's holiday broadcast, a compilation of messages from Earth and traditional Thanksgiving entertainment. As the familiar images played across the screen, he noticed Alara gradually relaxing, her rigid posture softening incrementally. "Your species places great importance on shared experiences," she observed. "It's how we connect," Marcus replied. "We're social creatures." "Yet you chose the most isolated human outpost." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Sometimes we need distance to heal before we can connect again. Their conversation flowed more easily as the evening progressed. Alara asked about his military service, and he shared carefully edited stories, omitting the worst of what he'd seen during the resource wars. In turn, she spoke of her home world, a place of crystalline structures and mathematical perfection, where emotions were considered primitive distractions. Yet you seem interested in our emotions, Marcus observed. Alara's silver markings pulsed subtly. They are a variable I had not fully accounted for in my studies. When she finally rose to leave, nearly 3 hours had passed without either noticing. At the door, she turned to him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Thank you for this experience, Marcus Donovan. It has been educational. Just educational, he asked with a small smile. The faintest hint of color tinged her pale blue cheeks, and not unpleasant. After she departed, Marcus cleaned up with a lightness he hadn't felt in years. What he couldn't know was that Alara had returned to her quarters and spent hours staring at her communication device, struggling with what to report to her superiors. Finally, she activated the secure channel. Initial immersion complete, she transmitted. Humans appear to prioritize emotional connection as a foundation for cooperation. This may represent a strategic advantage rather than the weakness previously assessed. Clarify evaluator, came the immediate response. Alara touched the silver markings on her face, which still tingled with unfamiliar warmth. They create strength through shared experience rather than shared ideology. It bears further investigation. What she didn't transmit was how the evening had awakened something dormant within her, a curiosity about what it might mean to feel rather than simply observe feelings in others. And how, for the first time since arriving on the station, she had experienced a moment where she'd forgotten her mission entirely, caught up in the simple pleasure of connection. The Valthorian High Command would consider such a lapse dangerous, but as Alara prepared for her regeneration cycle, she wondered if perhaps it was the most important discovery she had made yet. In the weeks following Thanksgiving, the residents of Frontier Station Epsilon noticed something unexpected. The station's sole Valthorian was changing. Alara still maintained her precise schedule and formal demeanor, but she had begun to participate in station activities. She attended movie night in the communal dome. She joined the xenobiology team for field research, and most notably, she was often seen in the company of Marcus Donovan. Today, they walked together through the station's arboretum, a carefully cultivated space where plants from various worlds grew under specialized lighting. Marcus had been showing her Earth's seasonal traditions, and the arboretum staff had set up a small winter display complete with a decorated pine tree. The symbolism escapes me, Alara said, studying the twinkling lights. Why bring vegetation indoors only to watch it slowly die? Marcus laughed. That's a rather morbid take. It's about bringing light and life into the darkest time of year. Your species finds many ways to define natural cycles, she observed, but her tone held curiosity rather than judgment. As they continued their walk, Marcus noticed Alara checking her communication device more frequently than usual. Tiny flickers of concern crossed her features, subtle expressions he wouldn't have noticed weeks ago, but could now read with increasing accuracy. Is everything all right? He asked quietly. Alara hesitated, which was itself unusual. The Valthorian normally either answered questions directly or declined to answer them at all. I have received concerning data, she finally said. I require additional time to process its implications. Before Marcus could press further, Commander Rivera approached them, her expression strained. Donovan, I need a word. Marcus excused himself and stepped aside with the commander. Your friendship with our visitor hasn't gone unnoticed, Rivera said without preamble. Some members of the council are concerned about the amount of time you're spending together and the access she's gaining to sensitive areas of the station. Alara is here as a scientific attaché, Marcus replied. All her credentials were cleared. That's what the Valthorian government told us. Rivera lowered her voice. But we've intercepted some unusual transmissions from her quarters, encrypted communications on frequencies not covered by our agreements. Marcus felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything, I'm telling you to be careful. Rivera's expression softened slightly. Look, no one's saying you can't be friends, just remember your security clearance and what's at stake out here. After she walked away, Marcus returned to Alara, who was standing motionless before the decorated tree, her silver eyes reflecting the twinkling lights. Is something wrong? She asked, nodding his expression. Just station business, he lied, hatting himself for the sudden seed of doubt Rivera had planted. How about some coffee? I saved up my ration this week. They made their way to his dome, the walk passing in unusual silence. Once inside, Marcus busied himself with the coffee maker, a luxury item he'd brought from Earth. As the rich aroma filled the small space, he noticed Alara standing unnaturally still by the viewport, staring out at the stars. "I have not been entirely truthful with you, Marcus Donovan." Her words hung in the air. Marcus set down the coffee mugs with deliberate care. "About what?" Alara turned to face him, her posture rigid once more. "My presence on this station is not primarily scientific in nature." The commander's warnings echoed in his mind. "Then why are you here?" "I am an evaluator. My people sent me to assess humanity's potential as allies." Marcus blinked, processing this. Allies against what? Against the coming darkness. Alara's voice took on a formal quality he hadn't heard since their earliest interactions. "My civilization has detected a threat approaching from the uncharted regions beyond your frontier. We call them the Scourge, a nomadic species that consumes all in its path." Marcus sank into a chair. "And you didn't think to mention this before to warn us." "My mission parameters were clear. First, evaluate whether humans would be worthy allies or better used as a buffer zone to slow the Scourge's advance." The implication struck him like a physical blow. "You were deciding whether to help us or sacrifice us." Yes, her directness was painful but not unexpected. Such calculations are necessary for species survival. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, struggling to contain his anger. "And what was your conclusion? Are we worthy in your estimation?" For the first time, Alara's composure faltered. She moved closer, her movements less measured than usual. "I believe you are, but my superiors remain unconvinced." She hesitated, then reached out to touch his arm, the first time she had initiated physical contact. "The transmission I received today confirmed that the Scourge has altered course. They will reach this station within 30 standard days." Marcus stood abruptly. "We need to alert command, begin evacuations." "That would be unwise." Alara's grip tightened slightly. "If the Scourge detect a mass departure, they will accelerate their timeline. Our best chance is to prepare defenses while maintaining normal operation patterns." "And I'm supposed to trust you on this, after you just admitted you've been lying since you arrived." "I have omitted truths. There is a distinction." Her silver eyes held his. "But I have never lied about my regard for you." The statement hung between them, charged with unspoken meaning. Marcus stepped back, creating distance. "I need to think." "We don't have time for hurt feelings, Marcus." Something in her voice had changed, an urgency, an emotion breaking through. "I have already violated protocol by warning you directly. The High Command believes humanity is too fractious, too emotional to be trusted with advanced knowledge of the threat." "So why tell me now?" "Because I have observed something my people did not account for." Alara moved to the viewport again, her profile sharp against the stars. "Your emotions, the very traits my people consider weakness, create connections that generate unexpected strength. Your capacity for adaptation, for finding solutions where logic sees none." She turned back to him. "I believe you can survive this. I believe we can survive this together." Marcus studied her, seeing beyond the alien features to the complex being beneath. "You've changed since you arrived." Yes, her admission was soft. "That was not part of my mission parameters." The anger didn't disappear, but something else rose alongside it, understanding, and beneath that, feelings he wasn't ready to name. "What do you need me to do?" Relief flickered across Alara's features. "Help me convince your leadership. They will not believe me alone. Rivera already suspects you're not what you seem." "Then we must use that." Alara moved closer, her voice intense. "Marcus, what grows between us is unprecedented between our species, but there is more at stake than personal feelings." He knew she was right, yet couldn't help asking, "And what exactly is growing between us, Alara?" The pale blue of her skin darkened slightly. "I do not have adequate terminology. My people would call it contamination, the influence of your emotional nature affecting my judgment, but I find I cannot regret it." Marcus took her hand, nodding how her silver markings pulsed at his touch. "Then let's save this station together." That night, as they began formulating their plan to convince station leadership of the impending danger, Marcus realized two things with stark clarity. Alara had risked everything to warn him, potentially committing treason against her own government. And somewhere between Thanksgiving dinner and this moment of crisis, he had fallen in love with her. What he couldn't know was that Alara, too, was grappling with unfamiliar emotions as she sent one final transmission to her superiors. "Humanity offers unique strategic advantages. Recommend immediate alliance formation." She didn't mention that her recommendation was now inextricably tangled with feelings that had no place in Valthorian evaluation protocols. feelings that would mark her as compromised if discovered. But as she looked at Marcus charting defensive strategies with the same care he had once used to serve her Thanksgiving dinner, she couldn't bring herself to regret her contamination. "They're not listening." Marcus slammed his fist against the wall of his quarters, frustration radiating from him in waves that Alara could almost physically perceive. 2 weeks had passed since her revelation, and despite their best efforts, Station Command remained skeptical of the threat. "They believe I am exaggerating to test your emergency protocols," Alara said, her voice calm despite the urgency she felt. "A not unreasonable assumption given my earlier deception." Marcus turned to her, his expression softening. In the past weeks, they had worked tirelessly analyzing station defenses, identifying vulnerabilities, developing contingency plans that could be implemented quickly when the threat materialized. Through late nights and shared purpose, their connection had deepened into something neither could fully articulate. "We need proof they can't ignore," he said. Alara hesitated, then reached for the communication device embedded in her wrist guard. "There is one option we have not explored. I could request a direct channel to my superiors." "Would they agree to speak with our command?" "No, but they might agree to speak with you." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Me, why?" Alara's markings pulsed with a soft blue light, a physiological response she could no longer fully control around him. "Because you are the variable that changed my assessment. They will be curious." The word carried weight beyond its simple meaning. In Valthorian culture, to inspire curiosity was significant. It meant one had presented a puzzle worthy of intellectual resources. "Do it," Marcus decided. Hours later, they stood together in her quarters as the communication array hummed to life. A holographic projection materialized, a tall Valthorian with elaborate silver markings denoting high rank. "Evaluator Voxthal," the figure intoned. "Your request for direct communication with a human subject is unprecedented." "As is the situation, High Commander," Alara replied formally. "May I present Marcus Donovan, Security Specialist of Frontier Station Epsilon." Marcus stepped forward, forcing himself not to show the awe he felt at his first encounter with another Valthorian. "Commander, I understand your people have detected an approaching threat, the Scourge. Our station leadership requires verification before implementing full emergency protocols." The High Commander's silver eyes narrowed. "Curious, you believe our word insufficient." "They believe Alara might be testing our responses," Marcus explained. "But lives are at stake, human and Valthorian." A long silence followed as the commander studied him. "Your concern extends to Valthorian life." "My concern extends to all life threatened by this scourge," Marcus answered honestly. "But yes, especially to Alara's." The admission hung in the air. The commander's gaze shifted to Alara, whose markings betrayed her emotional response with their brightened pulsing. "I see the reports of your contamination were not exaggerated, Evaluator," the commander said coldly. "Nevertheless, the strategic assessment has merit. A series of data files materialized before them. You may share these with your leadership. They contain sensor readings of the Scourge fleet's approach translated to your technological parameters." After the communication ended, Alara stood motionless, her expression unreadable. "What did he mean by contamination?" Marcus asked softly. "Emotional compromise," she replied without looking at him. "A serious violation of evaluation protocols." Marcus moved closer. "Because of me." "Because of what I feel for you," she finally met his eyes. "Feelings that have no place in my mission." Before he could respond, the station alarm blared, a shrill, pulsing sound that neither had heard outside of drills. "Proximity alert," Marcus said, instantly moving to the communication panel. "Rivera, what's happening?" The commander's voice came through, tight with tension. "Multiple unidentified vessels just dropped out of deep space. They're not responding to hails, and they don't match any known configuration." Alara and Marcus exchanged a look of horrified understanding. "They're early," she whispered. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of organized chaos. The data files from the Valthorian High Command had finally convinced station leadership of the threat, but preparations were still incomplete when the first Scourge ships breached the outer defense perimeter. Marcus found himself in the Security Command Center, coordinating defensive teams alongside Commander Rivera. Alara had been granted emergency tactical advisor status, her knowledge of the Scourge proving invaluable as the station scrambled to respond. "Their primary vessels are targeting our power core," Alara reported, analyzing the attack pattern. "Secondary units will attempt boarding actions at access points Delta and Gamma." Rivera nodded grimly. Donovan, take a team to Delta. Jensen, cover Gamma. Priority is containment. We can't let them reach the civilian quarters. Marcus caught Alara's eye across the command center. They hadn't had a moment alone since the alarm sounded, but volumes passed between them in that glance. I'm coming with you, Alara stated, moving to his side. Rivera started to object, then saw the determination in the Valthorian's face. Fine, but remember she's your responsibility, Donovan. As they armed themselves and headed for the threatened access point, Alara moved with a fluid grace that reminded Marcus. She was far more than the scientific observer she had pretended to be. You've done this before, he observed as she checked the energy weapon Rivera had reluctantly issued her. My people have been fighting the Scourge for generations, she replied. All Valthorians receive combat training regardless of primary function. They reached Access Point Delta just as the outer airlock sensors detected tampering. Marcus positioned his security team, consisting of the station's limited combat-trained personnel, at strategic points covering the entrance. Remember, he instructed them, these aren't pirates looking for supplies. The Scourge doesn't take prisoners or negotiate. They consume resources, technology, biomatter, everything. The inner door of the airlock shuddered under some external force. Alara moved closer to Marcus, her voice low enough that only he could hear. If we don't survive this, we will, he interrupted. If we don't, she insisted, I want you to know that meeting you was worth the contamination. Before he could respond, the airlock door exploded inward in a shower of metal and sparks. Through the smoke emerged figures that defied easy description, partly mechanical, partly organic, with multiple limbs ending in what appeared to be both tools and weapons. Their bodies seemed to be constantly shifting, adapting to their environment even as they moved. Now, Marcus shouted and the security team opened fire. The battle that followed was unlike anything Marcus had experienced in his military career. The Scourge fought not as individuals but as extensions of a hive mind, each adapting to the humans' tactics with terrifying speed. Standard weapons proved less effective with each passing minute. Alara fought at his side, her movements precise and lethal. When one of the security team fell, she pulled Marcus down just in time to avoid a projectile that would have taken his head off. They're learning our patterns, she shouted over the chaos. We need to disrupt their neural network. How? Alara pointed to a central figure among the invaders, slightly larger with more elaborate mechanical components. The node controller. If we can disable it, the others will be temporarily disoriented. Marcus nodded, understanding immediately. Cover me, he called to the remaining security team, then began moving laterally along the corridor wall, Alara providing covering fire as he positioned himself for a clear shot at the controller. But the Scourge, ever adaptive, sensed the strategy. 3 of them broke formation, moving with inhuman speed to intercept Marcus. He fired rapidly, taking down one then another, but the third was almost upon him when Alara threw herself into its path. The collision sent them both tumbling to the floor. Marcus watched in horror as the creature's limbs wrapped around Alara, its surface beginning to ripple as if preparing to absorb her. Without conscious thought, he redirected his aim and fired repeatedly until the creature fell away from her, its form destabilizing into inert matter. In that moment of distraction, the node controller had advanced, now mere meters from their position. Alara, despite being injured, locked eyes with Marcus and reached for her fallen weapon. Together, she gasped. They fired simultaneously, their combined shots striking the controller with enough force to rupture its central processing unit. A high-pitched keening filled the air as the remaining Scourge units began to move erratically, their coordinated attack dissolving into chaos. Now Marcus shouted to his team, everything you've got. The concentrated fire overwhelmed the disoriented invaders. Within minutes, the corridor was silent except for the labored breathing of the survivors and the occasional spark from damaged systems. Marcus rushed to Alara, kneeling beside her. A viscous blue fluid seeped from a wound in her side where the Scourge creature had begun its absorption process. Medical team to Delta now, he barked into his communicator. We have wounded. Alara's hand found his, her grip weak but insistent. Did we stop them? This group, yes, Marcus cradled her head gently. Rivera reports similar success at Gamma. The fleet is still engaging our defenses, but we've held the station. Her silver eyes seemed to dim slightly. Good, that's good. As the medical team arrived and prepared to transport her to the infirmary, Alara pulled Marcus close, her voice barely audible. What I feel for you, my people would call it weakness, but I think it might be strength instead. Marcus pressed his forehead to hers. uncaring of the station personnel witnessing this unprecedented contact between human and Valthorian. "Hold on to that thought," he whispered, "because when this is over, we have a lot to talk about." As they separated her from him, loading her onto a stretcher, Marcus remained kneeling in the corridor, his hands stained with her blue blood. In the midst of chaos, with station alarms still blaring and reports of damage coming in from all sectors, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. He would not lose her now, not when they had finally found each other across the vast gulf of stars and species. And somewhere in the depths of space, the Valthorian High Command received a final, fragmented transmission from their evaluator. Humans, worth fighting alongside. Worth everything. The station's medical bay had never been designed for xenobiological emergencies. Dr. Powell, their chief medical officer, had done his best with Alara's injuries, but the unfamiliar physiology left him working largely on educated guesses. For 3 days, Marcus had barely left her side, watching the silver markings on her skin fluctuate between bright pulses and dull, barely visible traces. "Her autonomic systems are stabilizing," Powell told him on the 4th morning, reviewing bioscanners with a puzzled expression. "But I can't tell if she's healing or just adapting to the damage." Marcus nodded, his hand resting near Alara's but not quite touching it. In the aftermath of the battle, the station had been too busy with repairs and security measures to pay much attention to the unprecedented closeness between a human officer and the Valthorian evaluator. Commander Rivera had debriefed him once, her questions clinical but her eyes knowing. "You should rest," Powell advised, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You're still recovering yourself." The doctor nodded toward Marcus's leg, freshly bandaged where a scourge weapon had grazed him during the battle. He'd barely noticed it at the time, adrenaline and concern for Alara overwhelming everything else. "I'll stay a little longer," Marcus replied. When Powell left, the medical bay fell quiet except for the soft hum of monitors. Marcus finally allowed himself to take Alara's hand, her skin cooler than human temperature but warmer than it should be by Valthorian standards. The silver markings on her wrist pulsed weakly at his touch. "I know you can hear me," he said softly. "Your people value plain speaking, so I'll be direct. I love you, Alara Voxtel. I don't know if that means anything in your culture or if it's even possible between our species, but it's true." The monitors registered a slight acceleration in her vital signs. "So I need you to fight, to heal, because I'm not ready to lose you when we've barely begun to understand what this could be." A flash of movement caught his eye, her fingers tightening around his. "Marcus," her voice was barely audible, her silver eyes opening to mere slits. "You're injured." He laughed, the sound half relief and half disbelief. "I'm injured. You nearly got absorbed by an interdimensional horror." Not interdimensional, even weak her precision remained, merely extragalactic. Marcus leaned closer, his free hand gently touching the side of her face. "How are you feeling?" Compromised, her markings pulsed more strongly, but functional. Before he could respond, the medical bay doors slid open. Commander Rivera entered, accompanied by 2 figures Marcus recognized immediately as Valthorians. Their environmental suits were more elaborate than Alara's, with rigid components suggesting armor or high rank. "Donovan," Rivera said formally. "Representatives from the Valthorian High Command have arrived to retrieve their personnel." The taller of the two stepped forward, silver eyes fixed on Alara. "Evaluator Voxtel, it is fortunate we find you alive if damaged." Alara struggled to sit up, Marcus supporting her with a hand on her back. "Commander Tevril, I did not expect a personal extraction." "Your final transmission was concerning." The Valthorian's gaze shifted to Marcus, nodding his proximity to Alara with obvious disapproval. "As was your breach of evaluation protocols." Rivera cleared her throat. "Perhaps we should discuss these matters once Alara has fully recovered." "That will not be necessary," Tevril stated. "We have medical facilities aboard our vessel better suited to Valthorian physiology. We will depart immediately." Marcus felt Alara tense beside him. "Commander," she said, her voice stronger now, "I request permission to complete my recovery here." "Request denied." Tevril's tone left no room for argument. "Your contamination requires immediate isolation and treatment. The High Council awaits your full report on this regrettable incident." "Contamination?" Rivera looked between the Valthorians and Marcus with growing understanding. "You mean her relationship with Donovan?" "Emotional compromise is a serious condition among our people," the second Valthorian explained. "It impairs judgment and corrupts objective evaluation." Marcus stood, positioning himself slightly between Alara and her commanders. "With all due respect, that contamination is what saved this station, without Alara's warning." We are aware of Evaluator Voxtel's actions, Tevril interrupted. They will be addressed during her rehabilitation. The clinical way they discussed what was clearly intended as reprogramming sent a chill through Marcus. He looked to Rivera, but the commander's expression was carefully neutral. This was diplomatic territory far beyond her authority. I wish to remain, Alara stated, her voice clear despite her weakness. Tevril regarded her with what might have been disappointment. That desire itself is evidence of your compromised state. The second Valthorian moved forward, a medical transport unit hovering behind him. We should proceed. Prolonged exposure will only worsen her condition. Marcus felt Alara's hand find his, her grip surprisingly strong. The touch was deliberate, performed in full view of her superiors, a defiant statement that sent the Valthorians' markings pulsing with obvious alarm. I am not ill, Alara said firmly. What I have experienced here is not contamination but evolution. Our people have suppressed emotional capacity for so long we have forgotten its value. But I have seen what it can accomplish. Tevril's posture stiffened. You have been sent to evaluate humans, not to adopt their flaws. Their capacity for emotion is not a flaw, Alara countered. It is what allowed them to adapt when the Scourge attacked ahead of schedule. Logic alone would have failed. Their creativity, their intuitive leaps, these saved lives both human and Valthorian. A tense silence filled the medical bay. Rivera glanced between the parties, clearly weighing her diplomatic options. Perhaps, she suggested carefully, there's room for compromise. Alara's observations about human emotional responses could be valuable intelligence for your people, especially if you're planning continued cooperation against the Scourge. Tevril's markings pulsed in what Marcus had come to recognize as consideration. You propose her. Contamination serves a research purpose. I propose, Rivera said, that different perspectives strengthen us all. Your evaluator has gained insights no other Valthorian possesses. Marcus squeezed Alara's hand, adding, and she fought alongside us. She bled for this station. That means something to humans. The second Valthorian moved closer to Tevril, speaking in their native language, a series of melodic tones too quick for the translation protocols to capture. After a moment, Tevril turned back to them. The High Council anticipated resistance, he stated. I am authorized to offer an alternative. Evaluator Voxtel may remain as permanent liaison to Frontier Station Epsilon, provided she submits regular, unfiltered reports on her experiences. Alara's markings brightened visibly. You wish to study my contamination. We wish to understand it, the second Valthorian corrected. The Scourge threat necessitates unconventional strategies. If emotional intelligence proves tactically advantageous, it warrants investigation. Marcus couldn't help but laugh. You're saying you want to study our relationship as a scientific experiment. Precisely, Tevril confirmed, missing the irony entirely, with particular emphasis on how emotional bonds affect decision-making under duress. Commander Rivera suppressed a smile. I think we can accommodate that arrangement pending approval from Earth Command. She turned to Marcus. Donovan, are you willing to be a subject of Valthorian study? Marcus looked at Alara, whose silver eyes held a warmth he'd never seen before. I think I already am. 3 months later, Marcus stood at the viewport in the newly repaired observation dome, watching a Valthorian diplomatic vessel dock alongside 2 Earth Alliance cruisers. The formal alliance treaty would be signed today, establishing the first official cooperative defense pact between humans and Valthorians. Nervous? Alara asked, joining him at the window. Her injuries had healed completely, though she bore a new pattern of silver markings along her side where the Scourge had touched her. A little, he admitted. I'm not used to being the center of attention. Since the battle, their story had spread throughout human space, the reclusive alien and the solitary security officer who had bridged 2 civilizations and helped repel a mysterious threat. The media called it a diplomatic breakthrough. Commander Rivera called it good PR for the Frontier program. Marcus just called it the luckiest Thanksgiving invitation he'd ever extended. The High Council is also apprehensive, Alara said, standing close enough that their arms touched. This represents an unprecedented shift in our foreign policy. Because of us. Partially, her markings pulsed with what he now recognized as amusement, though they prefer to frame it as a rational response to the Scourge threat. Marcus turned to face her fully. In the months since the battle, Alara had changed in subtle ways. She still maintained her Valthorian precision, but her expressions had become more readable, her interactions with the station crew more natural. And in private moments, she had begun to explore the emotional capacity her people had suppressed for generations. How's the latest report coming along? He asked, referring to her regular transmissions to the High Council about their developing relationship. Complete, she replied, though I omitted certain details they would find unnecessarily intimate. Marcus smiled, remembering the night before, when they had discovered new aspects of cross-species compatibility that definitely fell outside scientific reporting parameters. Their physical relationship had developed slowly, with careful research and occasional awkward moments that turned to laughter, another new experience for Alara. Ready to make history? He asked, offering his arm in the formal manner they would be expected to display at the ceremony. Instead of taking his arm, Alara surprised him by leaning forward and pressing her lips to his, a human gesture she had initially found perplexing but had grown to appreciate. Her markings glowed brightly, a visible sign of emotions her people had denied for millennia. I have already made history, she said softly as they parted. We both have. As they walked together toward the ceremonial chamber where representatives of two civilizations waited to formalize their alliance, Marcus thought about the unlikely chain of events that had brought them to this moment. A holiday invitation, a quiet dinner, a simple act of inclusion that had changed the course of interstellar relations. You never did tell me, Alara said as they paused outside the chamber doors, what you are thankful for now. Marcus smiled, taking her hand one last time before they would step into the public role that had been thrust upon them. Symbols of cooperation, subjects of scientific study, and pioneers of a connection no one had thought possible. Everything, he answered honestly, but mostly that you said yes to dinner. The doors opened, and together they stepped forward into the light, the first of many bridges between stars once separated by a frost that was finally beginning to thaw.